Lovely. So I'll hand over to Jessica now.
Hi, well, morning everybody. Hopefully you can see my slide, my first slide.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. Oh, well, this is one of our solar farms over at Braden Manor, up in the north of the county near Cricklade. This is actually our largest solar farm. It's 5 megawatts. So I'm the carbon reduction champion at Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy. I also work in the other half of my job for Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. So you may see me, have come across me in connection with either organisation. So I'll just explain a little bit about the Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy and sort of where this money for our fund comes from. So it was a project that was created in 2013, and it very much came about in collaboration with the Wildlife Trust. Although they're now legally separate entities, there is a bit of crossover in terms of things like my role, and we certainly work closely with the trust. But at the start, it did very much come out of the trust and looking for renewable energy projects that could support biodiversity and encouraging wildlife, as well as reducing carbon, obviously. So it's a community benefit company, and we have volunteer directors, all of whom are from Wiltshire and locally based. And then we have shareholders. So we have 2 farms, and the shareholders have bought into those. There was a share offer some years ago to support the capital costs for that. So I think we've got about 600 odd members for these 2 projects. So we've got the Chelworth, which is adjoined to our Blake Hill Nature Reserve. I don't know if you've been to that one. It's near, there's an industrial area, and we just have a small site there with some sheep on and lots of projects to encourage biodiversity. So we enlarged the pond there, so we try and have some newts to encourage the newts, and we've encouraged insects and hedgerow life. We've got rare moth or rare butterfly, I think, that lives in the hedge there, and then we have a larger site at Braden Manor, which is the one in the first photograph. So that one's 5 megawatts. And then Wiltshire Wildlife Trust installed some smaller solar on several rooftops some years ago, which Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy has now taken ownership of. So those are smaller arrays, but it's the profits or the income from that is going towards this fund. So as a community benefit organisation, they're obviously looking to invest any profit or surplus locally. So last year, almost a year ago actually, I was employed as a carbon reduction champion, and that was particularly to look at projects around fuel poverty and energy efficiency. And this winter actually, we're still in the middle of running a series of what we call energy advice cafes called Keeping Warm This Winter in Melksham and Purton, which have just been very community based, working with community groups in those areas to talk to their residents about and it's giving simple energy efficiency advice that's quite straightforward to implement. And obviously a big part of the community benefit side of this organisation is the Community Fund, which has been going for some years now, and which awards grants to community and voluntary organisations across Wiltshire. So in that respect, because our projects and because we're a Wiltshire-wide organisation, it enables us to fund across Wiltshire, which is great, and that includes Swindon. So yeah, there's no sort of geographical boundary beyond that. But our projects do have to have 4 key objectives, or have to have one of these 4 key objectives. They don't have to meet them all, which I'll talk a bit more about. But obviously they're aligned to the objectives of Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy, so they're around wildlife conservation and reducing carbon, and then also this new area of energy efficiency. I should explain, my boss did this presentation, so that's his phrasing in terms of that show me the money. So as I said, the projects that we support are often, I would say the majority of projects have been around wildlife conservation and trying to support biodiversity and increase biodiversity at different locations locally. But we are also obviously open to projects that contribute to reducing carbon emissions and fuel poverty. And we'd be particularly keen to receive applications for projects around fuel poverty, because it's not an area that we've funded at all so far, I don't think. So since 2016, which was the first year of the awards, we have funded over £70,000 worth of projects, and we funded a wide variety of organisations, as you can see from the list at the bottom there. So some have been quite new groups and quite established. Wiltshire Scrap Store, Seeds for Success obviously does a lot of outdoor education work, along with Splash, but then we've also funded much smaller community groups such as Sustainable Warminster. We funded them a couple of times. Once more recently about a toad. They have a toad patrol. They have a toad project to try and protect the toads in Warminster. So that's a recent project we funded for them. And our most recent award has actually been to a group that only started last year, I think, in Trowbridge, who are looking after a pond. They're doing some desilting work there to try and reduce the amount of tap or mains water they have to put into it to when we have hot dry summers. So just to give you an example of a recent project, Holbrook Primary School in Trowbridge has also received some money from us. So they put in for our maximum award, which is £5,000, and they just had a playing field. They didn't have an area for outdoor learning or any kind of growing area, and they had a member of staff who I think was a real cheerleader for this and wanted to work with the children more outdoors and have a space that was useful for them. So they embarked on a fantastic project, and it really has transformed the area and I think the programme that they can offer the children. And they've actually put in for a slightly smaller bit of money this year they've received for extension of this project and putting up a shelter in that space so that they can use it for longer during the year. But that's really been a fantastic project, and we've had some great feedback around the impact that it's had on the school and the children. So it's wonderful to be able to support projects like that. And here are some photos from the garden and the wildlife area. So as you can see, lots of plants to encourage the insects, and even managed to catch a bee in one photo. But they're also doing vegetable growing on this project as well. So it covers a whole sort of area, or a broad spectrum. So in terms of the details of this grant, so we have recently started a small grant fund, which is for applications of up to £500, and there's a simplified process for that. There is information that we still need to kind of fulfil due diligence, but it is a shorter form than the main grant, and we're really encouraging those smaller grants. So we don't want it to be too onerous. There is a minimum amount of information we require, but if you know, and if your groups, or if you know of anybody who may be interested in applying, then please do get in touch and we can talk it through if they're a bit daunted by the form. We don't want it to put people off, but there is, as I say, a minimum amount of information that we need to collect from people applying to consider the grants. So yeah, we would love to get more applications for smaller grants, but then the bulk, I would say the bulk of the applications we receive are for the larger grants, so from £500 to £500 up to £5,000. So our panel, which is made up of members of, we have a couple of board members from Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy. We have a couple of members, so investors in Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy who sit on that board. And then we also have a representative from the Wildlife Trust and a Wildlife Trust member who sit on that panel. And we were meeting 4 times a year, but we've dropped that to 3 times from this year, because we've actually found now that there's been a lot more interest in the fund as people are more aware of it, and we've had more promotion of the fund this year, or in the last year and early this year. So the amount we have to spend each year varies, and we're currently sort of negotiating for perhaps a larger pot of money to spend this year. But I can say that we actually met on Monday, the panel met, because I'm the secretary to that board. Sorry, I should have said that at the start. I don't get a decision or a vote, but I do the administration for the board. And yeah, so we met on Monday. Our next meeting is on the 10th of July. And then we'll have another meeting in the autumn on the 9th of October. So the award is the fund is awarded or donated every September following the AGM. So members of the Community Energy Organisation get to vote on the award that's made. So our October meeting obviously will have the new pot of money. Should have been awarded by then. We ask for applications at least a week before the meeting date, because so that I can send out papers. So ideally we'd like them a couple of weeks before at the very latest, because then it just means if there's any additional information that we need, I can get back and ask for that, or if there's any other detail that might be missing that I know the panel will ask about. Over the last year, we're looking for much more information about the breakdown of budget. So I would say it's really helpful for the panel to see to get a really clear idea of where the money is going, what it's going to be spent on, and also perhaps a breakdown of the project into stages, so that we can, with perhaps prioritised areas, so that we can see if perhaps we don't have money to fund the whole amount that you're asking for, then we can fund particular kind of elements of a project. So if it's broken down, that can be really helpful. And again, if we have an idea of the priority areas of that breakdown, that's great. So there's much more information on the Wiltshire Wildlife website about the community fund, and we post things like any changes to the dates up there, and the application forms are available there, also the guidance for the fund, and also on the Wiltshire Wildlife Community Energy website too, you can access the information there as well. Sorry, suddenly got a bit croaky. So we do have a PR consultant who works for the community fund and who's done a lot over the last 12 months to help promote the fund. So hopefully you'll have seen in the local newspapers and online information about some of the grants we've awarded. I think the one to the Chippenham Cycle Network had quite good coverage, where we were helping them to improve accessibility to the cycle network around the town. So some more details about the actual the grant fund. When we do receive applications, we do expect that the project is going to at least start within the next 6 months. We have actually recently funded a project that's a 3-year project, and we've awarded that in one go. So what we will be expecting is that they report back to us annually. So we do have a monitoring and evaluation process, which involves a panel member sort of becoming a sponsor for that particular award. So they will liaise and link in with the organisation that's been awarded, and they will follow up with a kind of halfway point monitoring just to check things are on track, and if there's been any changes, just to keep us updated about that. For example, obviously during COVID we had projects that were massively delayed or had to be completely changed. We were funding a project in a school that had been around trying to get people together, I think, for several activity days, and it ended up being a film that they put together, so which has actually been really impactful, which is great. But we do understand that projects can change, and we're really amenable to that, but we just need to be obviously kept informed. And then at the end of the project we like to have a full evaluation of obviously how the money's been spent and what's happened and what the impact has been. So we don't fund individuals. It's very much a fund that funds projects for communities and for groups, and you do need to have things like a constitution, safeguarding policy, data protection, and all of that. But what we have said is that groups perhaps aligned to, say, a parish council or a town council could liaise with the parish council and then perhaps have the money held by them if they don't have a bank account, or liaise with them around their policies. And obviously if they don't have a constitution, if we're satisfied that the group are going to be able to kind of or come under the umbrella of the other group that does have those details, then that's fine. We're flexible to that. So my email is there, and I think our phone numbers are on the website. As it says there too, we do need to see information around accounts as well, just to be able to see how much money the organisation does hold or has spent, and obviously that it's covered by insurance. And I think that's pretty much it. So if anybody's got any questions about that fund, please do ask.
So as I mentioned earlier, Wiltshire Community Foundation is largely a social welfare funder, but in recent years, some of the donors that we work with have wanted to move into sort of environment and conservation funding. So we're sort of increasingly working in that area. So it's still a new area for us, and we're still learning the networks and sort of other funders that are involved. But I just wanted to let you know what we've got at the moment. And it's possible that will build in the future. So the first fund that we have a partnership with Wessex Water, and they have a community foundation, and they offer environment funding. And the thing with this to point out is that it's only for projects that are based in the Wessex Water area. So that largely covers Wiltshire, but it doesn't include Swindon and some surrounding areas. They at the moment offer grants up to 1,500 over a 12-month period, and this programme runs once annually. They're looking again very similar to the energy fund we've just spoken about. They're looking at local biodiversity or things that will have a positive impact on the local environment for local people. So they're very focused on small local grassroots groups. So particularly groups that have an annual income of less than $500,000. So smaller local charities, right down to really grassroots community groups. And generally that will open for applications around April, May time, and decisions are usually taken in June, July. So that's the cycle, that's the annual cycle that we have. for that one. In terms of who can apply for that, again, I've said small voluntary or community groups of charitable aims, but those charitable aims do need to be written up in some form of constitution, so we know how the organisation is run. You can be a registered charity, you can be a not-for-profit company, a community interest company, but there are specifics around that, which means you must have a minimum of at least 3 directors who can't be related to each other, and the majority of those must be unpaid. So what we're essentially saying is if you're a not-for-profit company, you need to operate like a charity. For this particular fund, town or parish councils can apply, as long as there's evidence of the community benefit, and also schools can apply. Again, there must be evidence of sort of wider community benefit with that. A lot of our funds are only for charities, but for this particular fund, town or parish councils and schools. So if you are a small group and you're not constituted in the same way as Jessica mentioned, it may be that you want to partner with a local school or partner with a town or parish council, and they could apply on your behalf and manage the grant on your behalf. So that is an option if you're not a fully constituted group. And then their priorities, obviously, as a water company, are reduction in water use, improving environmental sustainability in the local area, or bringing improvements in local biodiversity. So very similar to the other funding we've talked about today. They're also keen to make sure that these key outcomes are covered, or at least one of them are covered in each application. So they want to see groups involving communities in activities that are going to benefit the area. They want to see a positive impact on the local environment, or something that shares learning with local people about supporting the environment. So they want it to sort of have wider benefits. An example of some of the things that have been funded. So we've funded wildlife ponds, recycling stations and litter picking, tree planting, rainwater harvesting, creating wildflower areas, and sort of citizen science projects like water quality surveys and that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of options for things that will make a difference locally. The other fund I want to tell you about is Science Museum Wroughton have a solar park, and they have a community benefit fund. Now, the key thing about this one is that projects need to be in or benefiting communities within a 10-kilometre radius of the solar park. So this one is more for Swindon groups. It picks up most of Swindon, but also some small parts of Wiltshire around the solar park. So you need to get on Google Maps if you're near that, and just check where your location is. This one offers grants up to £20,000, and they're looking at improving sustainability, biodiversity, or engagement with STEM subjects. So, you know, your science, technology, maths, engineering, that type of thing. And they are open for applications between September and December, usually, with decisions in February. And we've started having a sort of what we call a separate Meet the Funder online meeting for those, so that projects can come and discuss in a little bit more detail, because of course they're larger grants, and so we need to have a little bit more detail about what's going to be achieved. Again, same sort of list of groups that can apply. In terms of charities and not-for-profit companies, schools and academies or colleges can apply to this fund, but not parish or town councils, unfortunately. So that's a stipulation from the group that we're working with, the donor that we're working with them. So those grants are called Sustainable Futures grants. Like I say, they must focus some way on the STEM subjects or the environment. They're looking to either create a physical asset like solar panels, or some sort of local wildlife area. They must address an issue or encourage learning or engagement. So again, very similar to the Wessex Water Fund, they want there to be a sort of community benefit to what's happening. And I've already mentioned it must benefit communities within 10-kilometre radius of the solar park. They're also keen that projects have a sort of legacy beyond the grant period as well, so that's quite helpful to sort of get in there. So again, that might be to do with learning, building on the learning, or you might have created a physical asset that will you know, benefit the community beyond the period of the grant. Those grants you would have 18 months to spend and to run the project. Their priorities obviously are reducing carbon emissions, or reducing your carbon footprint, as people might say, creating sustainable renewable energy solutions, taking positive local action to tackle climate change, like I say, improving engagement in STEM subjects, particularly for groups of people that might be less represented in those, you know, in learning or careers in those areas, or you might want to trial or implement a new solution to a local problem. And a few examples of the things that we have funded or that the fund has funded to date. So we've funded some solar panels on, you know, individual buildings, reducing water, so, you know, installing rainwater harvesting systems, conserving habitat, planting trees or wildflowers, creating, you know, a new approach to STEM learning. So, you know, that might be within schools, but also within the community, using new or innovative technology solutions to tackle local issues, or in this case, research feasibility studies or pilot projects. So they might be able to sort of fund something that would kickstart a bigger project. Finally, there's one other programme I want to mention, which is more around conservation projects. I realise this is a lot of information to take in, but hopefully there'll be some questions if you're not sure on anything. We have a small pot of money from a trust that we inherited that is focusing on heritage and nature. So we run this as a closed programme, which means we'll take expressions of interest. So you can give us a small amount of information about your project, and then we would invite groups that have projects that fit the brief really well. We would invite them to apply. And so we may invite 2 or 3 groups to apply for smaller grants of between 5,000 or 15,000, or we may find that there's a good proposal and we would invite an organisation to apply for a larger grant, which might be 20 to 25. And so we make those decisions once a year. So by that, it means that we would either award 2 or 3 small grants or 1 large grant. So that the pot available is around 20 to 25,000. Again, that is just voluntary or charity organisations. It doesn't include parish councils or schools in this case. And it funds work that will preserve land or buildings of beauty or historic interest, but that includes the preservation of animals and plant life. So, you know, small scale conservation projects would fit really well in that. And that's within the Wiltshire and Swindon area as well. So that does cover Wiltshire and Swindon, this particular pot. And because of our own charitable objectives, we would need to see some evidence of community benefit within those, but that could be something like volunteering opportunities for local people, could be education activities that you provide for the community, or it could be that you provide a meeting space in some way for people. So just good to point those things out in the application. And then generally for all of these 3 funds that I've talked about, the use of the grants. So you could apply for any existing or new activity. That could be core costs for running the organisation, could be project costs for doing a specific activity, it could be capital costs. The thing with capital costs is if it's a small amount of money towards a much larger project, you would need to have secured the rest of that money really before we could award a grant for any of those, because again, you'd need to be able to start the project within 6 months of being awarded the money. So you couldn't apply for something that is going to go into a pot that will take you another 3 or 4 years to, you know, gather the money to do the project. So you'd have to be ready to go. And then general eligibility requirements, again, for all of those funds, very similar to what Jessica has said. You know, you need to have some sort of recognised structure supported by a governing document, a constitution. You'd have to have a management committee or a board made up of at least 3 individuals who must be unrelated, and they must be actively engaged in running the organisation, managing the finances and the activities of the organisation. Financial records, we'll be looking at accounts or you know, or evidence of your income, expenditure and the reserves that you hold. We would be looking at a bank account that needs to have at least 2 signatories. Again, they need to be unrelated individuals. And again, we would be looking at suitable policies that would include safeguarding and equalities, but we would be looking at health and safety and insurance as well, to make sure you've just got all the arrangements in place to make sure that activities are safe but also inclusive, and that all members of the community could be involved if they wish to. And then we would always say to anybody wanting to apply, please read the full criteria on our website. You know, if you have any difficulties getting hold of that, you can always give us a ring and we can send you more information. There are variations sometimes for different programs, so it's really important to be absolutely clear whether you are an organisation structure that can apply. So again, that's really important to read that information, but ultimately give us a call or email us if you have any questions or concerns, or you just want to chat through a project before putting the effort into applying, because we realise how much work goes into applications. So that's always really helpful. And the last slide, having gone through that quite quickly, just has our contact details, so I'll leave that up for a second if you want to make a note of any of those. But we will of course share the slides with everybody that's come today or registered today, so you'll have this information to look at your leisure. So that is a very quick run through of the 3 more environment and conservation related projects that we have at the foundation. Does anybody have any questions?